River City Girls released in 2019 and aimed to reboot the classic beat-em-up style that had been somewhat forgotten until now. It really depends on what you consider a beat-em-up, but looking back at some of the best classic side-scrolling 2D beat-em-ups, the best ones are generally pretty old and not super accessible to people nowadays. Apart from a quick try of River City Ransom through Nintendo Online, I would say that River City Girls is the first beat-em-up game I really got into, and today we're going to be discussing my thoughts on it. So I purchased this game on my Switch when it was on sale for a relatively cheap price. Since the graphics or runtime was never super demanding, I never experienced any issues with it on my Switch, though having it on my PS4 might have been nice so I could get the Platinum trophy. Moving on, let's set up the story. So one thing I did really enjoy about this game was the humor and how it never took itself too seriously. The story is super simple, and the events that go down to get there are very comedic. You play as either Kyoko or Misaku, although Kyoko is clearly better, and you follow them on their journey across River City to find their boyfriends, Kunio and Riki. And, well, that's about it. There's lots of side characters that you meet along the way, as well as tons of unique bosses, but we can discuss that in a bit. Let's move on to the actual gameplay. As you can tell by the lack of a very interesting story, River City Girls is a game mainly based on its retro, yet still very modern styled gameplay, an amazing soundtrack and pixelated animations. As I've said, it almost perfectly replicated the beat-em-up style. When I tried River City Ransom, I felt like there was a fun game there, but I just really wasn't feeling it. But with this game, everything is updated and a lot more advanced, while still not being too over top or confusing. In case you didn't know, a beat 'em up game is basically centered around hand-to-hand combat against an insurmountable amount of enemies, and are traditionally side-scrolling 2D games. River City Girls has all of that, plus more. Instead of just spamming buttons to try and take down enemies randomly, it focuses on combos, special attacks, and sometimes even melee weapons. All sorts of moves can be learned from dojos through money, which is in an abundance, so you're sure to have all the moves by the end of the game. Moves utilize all sorts of button jumps and specific directions to do, which caused me to use both the controller stick and D-pad while playing. In combat, the D-pad was helpful for doing specific attacks that required me to be pushing downwards or upwards, but the stick was nice for moving around the world or dodging attacks. Although, it's rather rare to find a room with no enemies, and combining the two never felt unnatural actually. Special moves use up stamina from your stamina bar and are usually more powerful or better for crowd control than normal moves. Stamina is regenerated by hitting enemies, so it's also very easy to get. So, as the game goes on and you learn more and more moves, you begin to start chaining them together and making awesome combos to deal tons of damage. Apart from bosses, you never really see how much damage you're actually doing, but it's not a problem. Even going farther, there's still lots more depth to the combat. You can also parry attacks, pick up random objects and chuck them at enemies, pick up enemies and chuck them at enemies, grab stun enemies, and more. All of these add up to make each combat encounter feel interesting and fun, even if they're all essentially pretty similar. Also, there's tons of different enemy types, so some are a lot more difficult to defeat than the others. Overall, I really love the combat and all the fun moves you can learn. Although there's still one more combat thing to discuss, the bosses. Alright, so even though most of the bosses are unique in their design and attack patterns, I felt like lots of them were almost a little bit too out there and didn't really belong in a game like this. I mean, some of the ideas are great, yeah, but on execution, they just don't fit the gameplay and end up being very frustrating. Like, for example, there's one boss that is literally a bullet hell fight, since all they do is shoot stupid projectiles at you, and the dodging and mobility is never fast or precise enough to actually dodge them. To win, I mainly had to exploit invincibility frames from the projectiles. What about this other boss that pretty much plays Guitar Hero and you have to dodge all the notes, except it's a 2D game and the depth perception is awful. Good ideas, just not for this game. All in all, bosses weren't awful, I just liked the ones that actually focused on hand-to-hand combat and not tons of special gimmicks. Two last things that add to the combat are consumables and charms. Consumables are your basic items you find around the overworld, whether they heal you or give you a temporary special ability. They were nice for when I was in a sticky situation. Although there are actually not tons of unique ones, even though there's quite a few stores selling them around the world. Anyways, charms are a rather, interesting part of the game. They're basically like different armor in RPGs that either boost stats, which this game actually has, even though they aren't really super important, or provide special abilities. I feel like these really didn't need to be here, as almost none of them actually provide tons of game-changing playstyles or anything. Still, I suppose they were alright, and I really liked how they were all themed around stuff schoolgirls would have. Moving on, with all these special enemies, special moves, and bosses come with quite a bit of animation, and I must say the animation, despite being pixel art, is absolutely top notch in this game. I mean, overall the pixel art is great, but the animation is what really makes it stunning. Each move you learn is expertly animated and is always fun to watch. I know this has been said before, but honestly just go watch some animations in slow motion. It's really amazing. I just love how Kyoko takes a selfie after a successful parry, or how her mouth gets that cute little line thing at the end when she picks up a dude to show it's heavy. It's just really amazing and definitely top-notch pixel animation, at least with the moves. Enemies and some bosses do have a little less personality in their attacks. Going back to the combat, I do admit that apart from the bosses, the game isn't generally super difficult. While I still died a decent amount of times, just some normal enemies, it wasn't usually a problem since there's not tons of drawback to dying, just some money lost. There are two different difficulties, and the second one I'll be sure to try on another playthrough. Speaking of that, this game is stunningly replayable. First of all, it has a new Game Plus option that makes the game more challenging, but after beating the main game, quick spoilers here, skip ahead if you don't want to hear, you actually unlock two completely new characters to play as, Kunio and Riki, and both of them have their own unique movesets. All of this adds up to tons of reasons to replay it, apart from the gameplay just being good in general. I haven't started another playthrough yet, but I'm really excited to. I mentioned it earlier, but I didn't really get into it, but this game actually has a pretty big map to explore. While it's mostly just full of foes to beat down, shops and these little collectible statues can be found around it. Collecting all the statues is what I would consider to be essential, but that's only for one reason. They give you the secret boss and ending to the game, which is kind of a bad thing since the original ending is really unsatisfying. This was a point of criticism for the game, and I have to agree with it. For those people who didn't get all the statues, the ending just really sucks. The boss was fine, but the last cutscenes were just disappointing. I highly recommend collecting all the statues after beating the game, even though some of them are pretty difficult to find. But another thing I must praise this game for is its music. The soundtrack is really pumped, and the music aims to get you in the spirit for fighting, and it really works. Some songs have vocals while others don't, and both were really great. There's some truly wonderful stuff in there. Next up, I really love the anime style to this game. I won't get deep into my feelings about anime, but essentially, I think it's good. Go watch Violet Evergarden. Anyways, one of my favorite things about the style was the manga cutscenes. As a fan of manga, seeing the panels animated and voice acted was really great and fun to watch, even if lots of the cutscenes using them were unnecessary or kinda boring. The style was still so interesting to watch that it never lost my attention. With the voice acting, it was mostly pretty good, although some characters can get annoying, and that may be the intended effect sometimes. Anyways, two last things before we wrap things up. This game can be entirely played in co-op mode. One person is Kyoko, one person is Misaku. You can play through the entire game like that. I never had a chance to try it out, so I don't know if the difficulty increases or anything, but once I get a chance, I'm pretty excited to try it out. And finally, as if this game wasn't good enough already, there's multiple Undertale references. Most of them are blatantly obvious, like a skeleton shopkeeper who speaks just like Papyrus, but some of them were more hidden and fun to uncover. So, there you have it, my complete review of River City Girls. There is so much to love about this game, and I really believe it's way too underrated. I'll give this game an A, since there are still a few things holding it back from being perfect. Still, anyone with a console who can play this should be, well, playing it right now. It's really good, trust me. Anyways, thanks everyone, I hope to see you guys in another video, and please leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Thanks again. Bye.